Are you someone who is neurodivergent? Are you a CIO, an IT manager, or an MSP owner with people working for you who are neurodivergent? If the answer to either question is yes, this week's Compassionate Geek podcast will make a difference for you. Hi, I'm Don Crawley, author of The Compassionate Geek, and this week's Compassionate Geek podcast is an interview with Dr. Jeanette Ashworth, a Seattle area psychotherapist, and we're going to talk about how neurodivergent people can succeed in the workplace, and how owners, managers, and supervisors can help create an environment that fosters success for neurodivergent individuals. Now, before we get started, be sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel. My guest is Dr. Jeanette Ashworth. Dr. Ashworth is a psychotherapist practicing in the Seattle area. Her business is called Center for a Happier Life. She holds a master's degree in community counseling from Georgia State University and a PhD in management with a specialization in psychology from Walden University. Dr. Ashworth, welcome to the Compassionate Geek blog and podcast. Thank you for joining me. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to start by asking the question, what does it mean to be neurodivergent? And is this a change in terminology? Where did it come from? Give me a little background on the term neurodivergent.
The term neurodivergent refers to kind of a wide range of conditions that are essentially different from the majority population. And these include the autism spectrum, attention deficit, a range of learning disabilities, such as dyslexia. And there are many gifts that come with it. A lot of times people focus on it being, they feel like it could be something negative, but actually it comes with a lot of gifts and unique insights that I think are particularly meaningful. And there has been credit given to Judy Singer, who has coined the term neurodivergent.
Is it a relatively recent term? It seems like I've just started hearing the term neurodivergence within the last year or so.
Actually, I think it's been around for over a decade, but it's only in recent years that it's kind of come to the mainstream.
And it seems like the idea behind using the term neurodivergent is simply to say that people who you would describe as neurodivergent see things or think about things differently from someone who is described as neurotypical. And it's neither good nor bad, better nor worse, just different. Am I correct in that?
Well, I think there can be a wide range of opinions, and there's a variety of authors. I do think that's an excellent point, that because people who are neurodivergent can describe it themselves in a range of ways. But interestingly, if you survey people who are neurodivergent, when asked if they would change it, a large percentage have indicated that they would not, because it actually begins to become part of one's identity and way of thinking and way of being. So I've personally seen a wide range of degrees that people may incorporate this sense of being into their lives. But there's also a disability pride movement that also is trying to encourage people to share more openly. So actually, I should go ahead and say I'm actually neurodivergent myself.
And how did that manifest itself? What made you start to think, I need to gain a better understanding of how I think and how I perceive the world? Were there some clues that helped you make that determination?
There were some clues in terms of my own individual experience. And I noticed it had to do with ways of thinking, ways of processing, and then also my interactions with other people. And then lastly, I would say also, for me, some time awareness issues. So
as time went on, you became more aware of certain characteristics.
Right. And so for myself, I have attention deficit, and then I also have Asperger's traits. And so when I say time awareness, that time for me, I can often have a sense of hyperfocus, where I can really focus on something. And then other times it may be harder to focus. And then in addition, with the sequence of time, I have to be very aware and keep a variety of alarms, because sometimes what appears to have been like 10 minutes have gone by, it may be 45 minutes.
Really?
That type of thing. So there are a lot of people. Also, if you're the kind of person who's always like the last to arrive to a meeting, things like that, then you have to make a very mindful awareness of trying to take steps to counteract against that. So, trying to be there, setting the time to be there earlier than indicated, whatever it may be, to be aware of that.
Earlier, you mentioned that there are certain gifts that accompany being a neurodivergent individual, and you just mentioned the hyper focus that you experience sometimes. Is that one of the gifts that you would describe?
It is, and it is for many people. And then, there is a saying that says, if you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met just one. They also say that about autism, if you've met one autistic person. And then at the same time, there are some things that people may have in common. And this is one for many people, is the ability to hyperfocus, which can create some excellent skills at maybe going really in depth on a topic or a subject. It helps some people be very detail oriented, where someone else might miss something. It also helps people to become more specialized. They've often called someone's ability to really delve deep into a subject, may refer to it as little professor syndrome, and that type of thing. And there's many really positive attributes that go along with that.
In our next section, when we talk about how managers and supervisors can help people who are neurodivergent in their careers, seems like one of the things that we'll talk about is identifying those characteristics, those wonderful traits, and finding ways to help the neurodivergent individual use those in the workplace to their benefit.
Yeah, definitely. There has been a lot more emphasis in recent years on neurodiversity at work, and there are a number of top companies that have specifically incorporated neurodivergent hiring, neurodivergent kind of programs, policies, employee groups, that type of thing, to really have neurodiversity become part of their inclusion efforts.
So thinking about the efforts that are being made on the part of companies and organizations to be more inclusive of neurodivergent individuals, let's talk about what neurodivergent individuals can do to gain better skills at working with neurotypical individuals, so that they're able to cross those bridges or to form bridges between members of the neurotypical community and members of the neurodivergent community to get things done. And as a neurodivergent individual, what are some of the things that they can do to put in their tool chest, if you will, to help them in their career and in dealing with other people?
Okay, sure. Now, I guess, first of all, you have the issue of disclosure. Now, I just mentioned some companies that may have specific neurodivergent hiring, and as part of that, people may be identifying their status in that regard. And at the same time, it's also possible that someone has been hired and they have not shared that. So, it is the right of the individual to disclose or not disclose. And so I guess I just kind of wanted to frame that either way.
Would you encourage people to disclose?
That's a really good question, because I have heard pros and cons both ways. I think for the most part, if you are being hired under a neurodivergent hiring initiative, then there's going to be lots of positives for disclosure.
Mhm.
There will be lots of positive supports built in automatically for you. And then also, if you're looking to get hired at a place that you're under a regular hire, you may decide to wait and see if you need any accommodations. But hopefully, I think the important thing of bringing awareness is that more people will feel comfortable, and then we can also educate employees in the workplace to understand what that means. And I think that's a concern people may have is because of stigma. But I've mostly heard positives, but I have heard from a few individuals that they felt that once they disclosed it, they were worried about being passed over for the really top level positions because maybe they thought someone didn't know if it would be, maybe too stressful. But generally a workplace that's going to allow you to, demonstrate the range of what you can do, hopefully there is no limit to the possibilities.
So going back to the question now, and thank you for the discussion about programs to support neurodiversity in the workplace. But let's talk about tools that a neurodivergent person can use for working in a workplace with neurotypical individuals or people who have other aspects of neurodiversity than what they might have. What are some tools that they might have that they might want to put in their toolkit that could work for them to help them integrate into the workplace?
Sure. I think whether someone's disclosing or not, if there's communication about what your preferences might be, is going to be incredibly helpful. And if there are any sensory challenges, many people have learned how to mask, which means that they may hide or not say certain things that might be bothering them. And then up to a point, but ideally people would not have to mask so much. So let's say you're in a workplace and it's incredibly noisy, then some people might benefit from noise canceling headphones, or even being able to just bring their earbuds and listen to music. And so someone could say, hey, I'd like to play my music, but I'm really working hard. Is that a problem? Kind of checking in. And then also, maybe describing what your preferences are for feedback, that type of thing. Also, many people can benefit from sharing how they like to receive their job assignments. So let's say you prefer to read it and to have written instructions, but maybe your boss likes to just share it at a meeting verbally. So then at that point, the person can decide, do they have the time to write it down and then they have a written one, or do they need to request, I'm really excited about this job. I'm going to, I look forward to, exceeding your expectations, but I really can maximize that if I have it in writing.
Could I get it in writing so that I can review it and you try to find ways to express it in terms of a benefit to your boss?
Exactly. Yeah. Express that as a benefit. And then there's, a variety of things that people can do to alleviate stress in the workplace. And, for one person, it might be to, go take a walk at lunch. And there might be someone else that actually would like to bring what would be called something to STEM with. And so they might have like a STEM toy. One example that most people have seen is like a stress ball, that type of thing, and just have it at their desk. And I know someone who's neurodivergent that also brought some small figures from one of their favorite games. This person happens to be a big gamer, and they work in the tech industry, and no one minded that they had that sitting on their desk, and then just was there's just something that was very relaxing for them to to look at on their breaks, that type of thing.
What about when a neurodivergent individual is put in a position of dealing with a customer? And I think about a potential client who called me a while back and described a situation where he'd taken an engineer to a client location to discuss a problem they were having at the client location. They weren't able to solve it. It required this one particular engineer to take care of that problem. And so he went in and fixed the problem. The client was adamant that they have a meeting afterward to debrief. And so the engineer did the debriefing and then turned to his boss and said, "See, I told you they were all idiots." And you know, he may have been accurate in his description of the people or not, but it was behavior that you wouldn't normally do in the presence of a customer. So would you have tips for someone who is neurodivergent when they're put in a position of having to deal with a customer, and in particular a customer where they don't particularly feel like the customer did the right thing, as in the case that I just mentioned?
Right. Well, there is such a range of kind of like behaviors and ways of interacting for each individual that is neurodivergent. And so for someone that might be prone to maybe kind of blurt out whatever they're thinking, then there can be some guidelines that they could give themselves, or, that their supervisor, might in a respectful way to be mindful of that. So one example would be in terms of speaking freely, there's a time when you're in your pure professional mode, and then there's a time when you can speak openly to your teammates, and kind of differentiating where that would be. So if this is the meeting room in the hallway, and then there are times when being very specific about the setting can help. And then also, because many people like to vent something if they're frustrating, but something like that could certainly alienate a customer, and also others as well. So that is individualized, but I think very thoughtful feedback to someone. And if a person really struggles with that, it's possible that they might benefit from from a different work role. But at the same time, we as much as possible trying to allow people the opportunity to be who they are, but at the same time, there's still those those norms of customer service.
What would you say to that individual if you were the boss after that had happened? How would you counsel the individual?
Well, I personally always try to come from a strength-based orientation, and so that I try to be mindful of also where I can giving positive. So I would try to find something to praise in terms of the work that they've done to get to this point with the client, but then also wanting to let them know that by saying this, I would label it could be an insult. And then trying to bring it back to empathy, so maybe have them think about a time if someone has said something that feels like an insult to them. And then in that regard, then I would also say, there's a time and place where you can vent that, but going forward, it's very important not to say it in front of the client. So I would basically say that in regards to what I just shared. And then in addition, on a side note, a lot of people are not aware of, in terms of intellectual disabilities, there are many terms common in our society still that are like idiot and moron and terms like that were once medical terms for people who are intellectually disabled. And then those terms have fallen out of use, but they're often used in general society. So that person may or may not be interested in that kind of trivia. Just try to create another level of awareness.
Any more tips on or for a neurodivergent individual on when they have to work with customers, on anything that you might want them to know, or some tool that they might be able to use before we move on?
Well, I think as much as possible, I think to relax. And when I say that, there tends to be, not for everybody, but for many people, there can be an anxiety that can come up very quickly when interacting with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, however, it's not there when interacting with one's very close friends or family. So sometimes if someone can kind of put themselves in that same, almost like a form of biofeedback, put themselves in the mindset and the state of body awareness that they're in when they're interacting with their friends, and then just try to speak from that point, that and try to reduce the anxiety. I was speaking to someone the other day that tends to get very nervous, and they were able to kind of drop the anxiety. And then later they were described as very charming. And I think that's because some of their personality was shining through.
Mm-hmm. Almost
But
able to trick your brain.
exactly. So people could try to do that through some breathing exercises, some mindfulness. Some people might have an app or a video of something that is calming to them. And then over time, it should become easier. Because I do know a number of neurodivergent individuals that have been very successful in customer service, and they originally didn't think they would be, but it actually, it turns out it can be an excellent fit.
So do you know any of the tools that they use to allow themselves to become so good at customer service? Just thinking about the person who's watching this interview thinking, wow, I could really use that. What are some of the tools?
Well, I think it did have to do with lowering anxiety. There's also many people that can benefit and understand many things in customer service may also come with a script. Some do and some don't,
yes.
Or some hybrid. But I think for some people, having having either a script or having some bullet points of what to hit on, but then also if they were able to feel that they could also relax and let a little bit of who they were also shine through, where it became a little bit more conversational.
Maybe a framework that they could use. And you mentioned bullet points, so that's not exactly a script that they would read verbatim, but something that would give them some talking points.
Right, and I think maybe for some people they might experiment with that, but I think that reducing anxiety was really the big piece. And then if they're more, and that would be maybe for, some basic customer service skills. If they're more advanced and more nuanced, then I think that there's communication skills that can be, more sophisticated too. And they're the things, that are kind of the classic customer service, about building rapport, connecting, selling the benefits of the product, those types of things. But I think that, this is definitely an area where neurodivergent people can really shine.
It's fascinating to me that you say that, because I feel like someone who is not familiar with the field of neurodivergence would automatically assume that a customer service role would be a very difficult role for someone who is neurodivergent. And yet you're saying the exact opposite, which is really encouraging.
Sure. And, if you look at it, let's say, for example, a company like Microsoft that has a very robust neurodivergent hiring program, they're currently hiring for customer service reps. And I think that, again, there's such a wide range of people who are diagnosed as neurodivergent, and then that it also may attract people that tend to also be a little bit more outgoing as well. Because you can have, many people will focus on what can be a bit of a stereotype, but that, what a neurodivergent person might look like. and act like. And so, and, you know, people do tend to be more introverted, but that's not necessarily true for everyone.
Yeah.
And at the same time, people can also go through kind of an energy cycle of being outgoing for a period of time, and then they need to rest and recharge and be able to do that again. So
that would be someone who would consider themselves to be an introvert, who can go through the motions of acting like they're outgoing, but after a while they've got to take a break.
Right, maybe someone who, for lack of a better term, like an extroverted introvert. You know, and it may be, you know, someone who does genuinely enjoy interacting with other people. But then it is common for neurodivergent people to also need time to regroup and restore their energy and have some time alone or time doing some of their favorite things.
What about if you're a neurodivergent individual and you're in just an average workspace? Any tips for communicating effectively with neurotypical individuals if you are neurodivergent?
Sure. I think, you know, again, it's about communicating who you are and how you work well. And then I think some people do feel now with, you know, disability pride that they want to educate people more. And I have heard from more and more people that they had shared openly. They say, hey, they might share that they're autistic or that they have ADHD, or that they have a learning disability, whatever the case might be. And then say also, if you have any questions, you know, let me know. And I've seen, you know, a lot of people do that these days where they're really becoming kind of an advocate for the community at large and feeling very comfortable about educating others. And then in addition, you know, it's not that it's always every individual's responsibility, because there is, I think, you know, you may have heard of the term of emotional labor.
Yes.
Where there's people, they can get tired of being the representative for everyone and feeling like that's really not their role. But
always putting on your game face.
Right. And there's a wide range of resources. And then also one thing that's very important is there's a concept of nothing about us without us. And that's a concept that the companies that are doing this work, it's very meaningful if they're mindful of including people for their neurodivergence programs that are neurodivergent in some way, and having them included at all levels, including in leadership, so that they can be, you know, part of the process and part of the decision making. And that also creates the, you know, the most effective utilization and integration of people over time and the best long-term outcomes.
So last question. Suppose that you think you might be neurodivergent yourself. So what? What do you do with that? How do you find out if it's true? If you feel like you might be a neurodivergent individual, what do you do?
Well, a lot of people will seek a diagnosis. And then that may depend on the state that you're in. In the state of Washington, there are certain credentials that you need to diagnose autism, for example. Although in other situations, like a mental health, like a therapist can diagnose almost every single thing, every single category in the DSM-5, but then autism also requires additional information. A lot of people will start out kind of self-diagnosing. There's a lot of different books, a lot of information on the internet. People start recognizing themselves sometimes on the lists, and they have a real hunch that this fits them. And if they find that some of the lists for solutions or things to try in your life is making a huge difference, then that's meaningful. Mm-hmm. There tend to be a lot of waiting lists right now for evaluations. And again, it may depend on the level of support that a person might think that they need. we know now that a lot of the resources and original evaluations were normed on males. So now one thing I'm trying to do is help provide more supports for girls and women, like on the autism spectrum and other areas of neurodivergence. But I think, those are two pathways that people can take. And then one thing for that comes up a lot is the identity of a person first language. So a person with autism, or identity first language, which would be autistic person. Mm-hmm. And I saw the other day where a company was suggesting to use person first language, but most people that are actually neurodivergent say to use identity first.
Interesting.
And it is interesting. And so I've seen people use both in an alternating way on some of their literature and saying, we want to be respectful. And, it's not an easy solution, because I have also heard from neurodivergent people that also prefer the person first language, but to, when you, as much as you can, try to respond to people the way that they prefer, how they prefer to be identified. That can be difficult in a large group setting. If you're interacting with a large group of people at once, to remember each individual, but as much as you can, you do what you can.
Yeah. And you be flexible, and you listen to the other people. Right.
And then you often see too, where, even I might actually, I might mix it up sometimes, not intentionally, but like neurodiversity, if someone says neurodiverse person, neurodiverse typically refers to a group, and neurodivergent refers to an individual. Mm-hmm. And then there's a consideration that's more than grammatical, but I often see it either way. And so it's not, I'm not the grammar police. And but if someone kind of wants to know what that distinction is.
Yeah. I heard somebody refer to grammandos as people who are very finicky about grammar, and unfortunately I'm guilty as charged on that sometimes. So, any last words before we wrap up this session? Anything you want to say to a person who is neurodivergent, or a neurodivergent person, about how to deal with the workplace and with workplace issues and neurotypical people? Any last words for them?
Sure. Well, and there are a number of companies that are doing amazing work in this area. So if someone is looking for employment or looking to expand, that something that they can check out neurodiversity at work type initiatives. And there's quite a few. You can also work in an area where, and find other places that can be very meaningful. And there's a wide range of resources. So I encourage you to read, learn as much as you can. I'll be putting a list of resources up on my website early next month. And there's so many amazing, inspirational, talented people that are neurodivergent. And so there's a whole community. There's a lot of different role models and mentors. And so I want to encourage people to get the support that they need, and then also to dream big and go for whatever it is that they want for their lives and their careers. And then also encourage employers to continue to either create neurodiversity at work programs, or to expand those that they have. So thank you, Dawn, for this opportunity to speak to you. I really admire the work that you do, and appreciate that you care about neurodivergent employees.
Well, thank you, Jeanette, and we'll post a link to your website in the description below. So thanks again, Jeanette, much appreciated, and we'll talk to you soon. Want more? Enroll your team now in Compassionate Geek IT customer service training so they can work together, get things done, and take care of customers. Visit CompassionateGeek.com or click the link in the description. Until next time, thanks for watching.